So the fact that 2 out of 3 executive directors plan on leaving is something we should all be aware of. Doesn't mean that we need to lose sleep over it, but we need to plan for it. And so interestingly enough, if you are in an organization where you have a leader, chances are they're probably thinking about leaving that role in the next 3 to 5 years. And if you want to be an executive director in 3 to 5 years, you got to go have a conversation with your boss today.
Hi, everybody. This is Greg Harrell Edge. We are back again, the Proimpact Pod, our weekly LinkedIn Live series, where we ask different experts the questions, how should modern executive directors think about blank? And super excited for the one today about ED career planning. So as the nonprofit sector is undergoing this huge evolution that we talk about every week, there's also what does it look like for the evolution of the types of leaders that boards are looking for and that the sector needs. And so we have got a great guest here to be able to ask exactly that. How should EDs be thinking about their careers and getting a next ED job or a first ED job in 2025? And so we welcome folks to comment in the chat. And Chris, our producer, will put your questions up on the screen. But the guest that we're going to be bringing on is Mariya Yurukova from Charity Search Group. And Mariya's got a really interesting background. She was a fundraiser herself with over $20 million raised for organizations that she represented. And then she pivoted into search and is really interested in finding the right fit between the organization and what they're looking for and the skills and experience of the candidates. And she works really closely with boards and hiring managers. So she's got all of the intel to tell us. And she even has a really interesting educational background where she's got a BA in psychology and an MBA as well with a concentration in marketing. So she brings all of that knowledge and expertise and word on the street and will join us. We'd like to welcome her to the stage right now. Mariya, how are you?
Hey, Greg. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. There have been a bunch of questions that I've been excited to ask you. People have reached out to me and said, oh, I'm really curious to hear, I want to know what's happening and what boards are looking for, how EDs should be thinking about their first or next role. We always like to start with a stat about sort of like why this matters. Yours, I think, literally might have made my jaw drop when you told it to us. What's a stat for that we should be thinking about for this topic?
Yeah. And, it would have been good if I'd actually, I will probably eventually find my sources because that came from sort of a nonprofit workforce survey that was done. I think this is actually the second year that they're doing it. It will come to me in a minute probably, but they asked executive directors sort of what is their plan. And 2 out of 3 said they plan on leaving their current role or the profession entirely within the next 5 years. Now there's many layers as to why that is the case. I think we've been talking about baby boomers exiting the workforce for quite some time now. There was a bit of a delay of that with the pandemic, and now it's definitely happening. I will tell you, every single week, I'm talking to an organization that says our executive director of 15, 20, 30 years has just handed in their notice and they want to retire. This is happening a lot, and I think it's going to continue to happen in the next 5 years or so.
And so that's what makes this conversation so timely, that for current executive directors of a smaller organization or someone who aspires to be an executive director, sort of what are boards looking for with all of the chaos that's going on in the sector right now. So what would you say is that one thing, the metric from the board perspective of kind of like what if you were to boil it all down, the one thing that a board is most interested in looking for in candidates?
Well, I think I would say that what impresses boards the most is growth. And so typically they want to meet with candidates who can easily identify something in their experience that they have done and the strategy they've deployed to grow it with like 10, 15%. The delta there doesn't matter as much. What matters really is I have a growth mindset. I can take something, I can deploy a strategy, and I can get it to a point of growth, whether that's fundraising results, whether that's service delivery stats or, continuous improvement. It doesn't really matter what it is, but understanding what that growth mindset looks like is really important, which I think is a little bit different than what we used to see in the past. I think in the past, we were really looking for mission alignment and understanding what the role of the organization is, or advocacy or community relations, or even things like public relations and sort of presence in the community, public speaking even. Not so much anymore. Now folks are really focused on sort of what I would call operational wizards that can take an organization and amplify its impact or grow it, essentially.
That's incredibly exciting to hear. I mean, part of the whole idea of the Proimpact Project is trying to create a sort of modern playbook and content and community for executive directors who are also focused on growth. That was something I always looked around for and couldn't find things that were really about, okay, well, what are the tactics of how you grow? One thing I would be curious to follow up about. So you said it doesn't matter as much, the fundraising versus the sort of impact or the program metrics. How often with boards do you think that actually is the case? Or how much when they say, yeah, we value each of those equally, do they really mean, well, we want to see how the fundraising has grown?
Well, so when I work with boards, my starting message for them cheekily is, you can have anything you want, you cannot have everything you want. Usually boards are very good at telling you everything that's on their checklist. And the follow-up question I always have is, what are you willing to compromise on? And usually that's when you can hear crickets. And so this is the point where it's not that none of these things don't matter anymore. It's just the question of which one is more important at this moment in time for this particular organization. And so even something like fundraising skills, it's so layered and nuanced and complex. It's no longer about, oh, we need someone who has experience with raising major gifts from individuals at the $100,000 level or more. Right? Now it's more, we need someone who can develop strong relationships and also ensure that those donors are mission and values aligned and will not jeopardize the public face of the organization if we're aligned with the wrong person, et cetera, et cetera. So it's much more complex, I think, than it used to be. But I wouldn't say that any one of those things doesn't matter. It's more what folks are prioritizing today a little bit more than the other thing. But if you ask them, they'll always want everything.
It's interesting, just in these first two answers. So I had a DM conversation after we posted that we were doing this episode, where someone said, it'll be really interesting to hear whether boards are looking for the things that we all wish and hope that they're looking for, or just the same old things. And both of your answers have been that it really is evolving and that they're really getting more sophisticated, that the idea of looking for growth, and then that it's not just a checkbox, that it's sort of like understanding that's all really, really exciting to hear. And so what do you think the future will look like over the next 5 to 10 years? What types of skills do you think a leader or prospective leader should focus on building for themselves to be able to show up that way for a board?
So I think, and to sort of close the loop on boards, and we could probably do another conversation just on board dynamics. It's always really important to remember that boards are not very sophisticated or experienced in hiring executive directors. I mean, if you think about it, if you do it well, they don't have to do that over a term or two anyways. And so that is an event that happens once every 5 years-ish. And so if you have boards with 2-3 year terms, it's unlikely you'll find someone. I usually, when I do a search, would have like 1 out of 5 people on a search committee who remembers the recruitment for the previous executive director.
Wow.
And so they don't intuitively know what they're looking for, and they rely on some of the work that we do, some input from staff sometimes, and then whatever their professional background is, that vantage point is really important. Like you talk to a board full of IT folks, you're going to get a lot of technical knowledge prioritization. And I'm probably overgeneralizing here, but that's generally the idea. So one of the areas that I think where we need to focus on, and I would encourage folks when they're doing things like they're negotiating their offers when they are an ED, is negotiate a budget line that says, here's how much money we're going to spend on board development. Grow your board, or if you're currently an executive director and you're 1 out of those 2 out of 3 that plans on transitioning the next 5 years, spend some money or time or effort, whatever way you want to define this, in really skilling up and developing your board so that they're more equipped to understand how to go about this hiring. And how to go about this hiring from a board perspective is the exact same thing that you need to do when you're actually looking for an executive director role too. And it starts with the same spot. You really need to know who you are. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your values? And I want to emphasize values, not what missions and interests are the things that you're excited about, because the nonprofit sector is so rich and diverse. There's so many things that you could be excited about and so many missions that you would like to advance. But how an organization functions and what values it has and how well they align with yours will determine whether that's actually a good fit for you or not. And then one rule that I follow early in my career, and I sort of have taken it with me, is always focus 80% of your time on your strengths and 20% of your time on your weaknesses or things you want to work on, not the other way around.
Interesting.
But you need to know what those are, right? And so if you are, like I'll use myself as an example. If you are a person that likes to grow and innovate and pivot things, you probably don't enjoy the types of roles that are like a steady ship in a big organization that's just asking you for incremental growth and all you're doing is a whole bunch of politics with various different stakeholders, right? That's probably not your niche.
I felt very seen by that all of a sudden.
And so you got to define what is it that you're good at and what you want to be spending the majority of your time on. And then you look for those kinds of organizations that are ready for you. So that would be, and it's the same goes with the boards. They need to understand where they're at and what they need in order to know what to look for in leaders.
You know, it's so funny. So I, for 9 years, was the executive director of Coach Art, which serves kids with chronic and serious illnesses. And people would always ask me, what's your personal connection to childhood chronic illness? And I didn't have a personal connection to it, thankfully, knock on wood. And, you know, it always felt like not the answer they were looking for when I would say, like, this organization just had an incredible mission and model that I felt like you could see what the inefficiencies were that could be solved to scale.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing I like to do. And that's what drew me to it. And sometimes people would react to that sort of like, oh, wow, that's really cool. But often you could tell they almost seemed a little disappointed that they're used to people having that personal connection. So I love the idea that, you know, the way you framed it being, you know, that the board should look for it in that regard. So then when you are working on that 20% of the time, and you wrote an amazing piece, by the way, in Advancing Philanthropy earlier this year that I think touched on this idea too. When you are working on diversifying your skills and experience, so that 20% where you want to add new skills or work on the things that you're not as strong on, how should an ED or prospective ED think about that 20%?
Well, so I think that you could go all the way from do it yourself and sort of do some of those inventories like Myers-Briggs or Clifton Strengths or any one of those. And then move this along all the way to working with an executive coach that will do some of those things and then do some interpretation and transformation that you sort of grounds you in. This is how I talk about myself. Because the one biggest difference I notice when it comes to executive presence and like how I define it is self-awareness. So if people really know who they are and how they show up and how they communicate their values through the examples that they give of the work that they've done, that's really powerful and sort of connects really well with this kind of executive audience. So that's one thing. But the other thing you also have to think about is, well, what does the market actually need? And so there's many different kinds of executive directors out there. So there's some, and like you will see some of those in some types of organizations more than others. But for example, fundraising, there's lots of organizations where the executive director needs to be a fundraising whiz, right? And so that's a main thing. Now, if you have organizations that are very heavily grants funded and they're very service delivery focused, that's when you're going to find folks who are service delivery experts. They're great at operationalizing services and optimizing dollars within the envelopes of grants, right? That's a different thing. And then you also could have executive directors that are really internally focused on making sure that they have a very strong team and they spend a lot of time developing leaders internally in the organization. That could be a thing too. And there's probably others I'm missing. But the point is you need to understand what organizations out there are looking for executive directors. Where are they at in their own life cycle of the organization? and what kind of leader will they need? Because if you really enjoy fundraising, then you should really look for roles that will give you that opportunity because they're ready for it, as opposed to looking for organizations that really need someone who will be an expert in service delivery and you really enjoy fundraising. Then you end up doing a lot of stuff you don't want to. Even if it's for the greatest mission that is super aligned with you, you're still not going to be as happy in that role. So I think there's some research that needs to happen there. And I think that's the power of networking. That's the reaching out and talking to folks and be like, hey, I'm really interested in this kind of community organization. Can we have coffee and can you tell me more about the work you do and how you go about it? And what are your challenges and what are your opportunities? You do that enough times, I think the picture will emerge, and then you'll know sort of what to orient yourself towards.
That makes sense. And Jason in the chat put up an interesting comment that Chris shared on the screen, the idea that the ED should share with their board, here's what my strengths are. And you kind of mentioned that as well, and be the one communicating that. And then I like, Jason, you're adding, even if it's complementary to theirs, to sort of like with that 80-20 rule, this is my strength, this is your strength. So we're going to be an organization that is really good at this. And then also, how are we going to flesh out the other things, that we're not as good at? Your answer reminded me of something. There's something that I didn't hear in your answer that I'm curious what you think of, that around the idea of diversifying your skills and experience and sort of like preparing to become a nonprofit ED. And that when I decided that I wanted to be an executive director, I was working for an organization and asked our ED, can you mentor me? Can you, coach, give me some ideas about basically that same question. What should I do to try to prepare myself? And we were 2 blocks away from one of the best nonprofit graduate programs in the country. And I said, so I assume I should start with applying for the grad program that's down the street and I'll just walk there. And he said, honestly, I wouldn't even do that. And this was, 15 years ago at this point. But he said, boards aren't really looking for, they might not even know that nonprofit grad programs exist yet. If I were you, I would take that same time and go and do stuff. And I ended up starting a little consultancy on the side. I ended up starting my own nonprofit on the side, like a little project that I worked on. And he said, you'll get real life experience that you can put on the experience part of your LinkedIn resume as opposed to education. Do you have any thoughts on, these days in 2025, how much boards are valuing management, specific graduate level nonprofit management versus those other types of experience that somebody could just go and do themselves?
So I don't know that it's an either or. It may be an and. There's definitely a place for postgraduate work, and you will see this occasionally. I'll also say that currently the nonprofit workforce in general is very educated. You will have lots of folks with master's degrees in something. And we're starting to see a little bit of that nonprofit management here and there, not a ton, but lots of other kinds of master's programs as well. So it's not really an area where we're seeing a ton of, we really need to have this. It's not like you're applying for a role where you need to be like a clinical director and you have to be a registered psychology. It's not that kind of credentialing, I would say. Now, I think master's in generally advanced education gives you an opportunity to pull things together and think critically and develops a whole bunch of skills that are very important to being an executive director. But you have to be in the right place in life, I think, and in time to be able to appreciate these and also have a little bit of life experience so that when you are learning the academic aspect of it, it's not just academic. You could actually see how it affects the real world. Now, in terms of doing stuff, I totally agree. And one thing that I would say to that is, what differentiates a candidate? So being an executive director, it's not like inside track of you need to have had these 3 job titles and then here you are, because it really depends on the organization. So for some organizations, you need to have been the chief development officer, and then that will make you an executive director candidate that's very competitive. For others, it could be the COO and very many others, right? And so what makes this super exciting is if you get someone who was a chief development officer, but there was a point in which they were actually a programs director, or there was a point in which they were actually overseeing the finance function or any one of those things. The more you can diversify that, because remember, an ED actually oversees all of those functions. And so the more of these you can actually demonstrate depth in, the more competitive you are, or the more well-rounded you are as a candidate. And so sometimes that requires a lateral move or a sidestep, which you need to be very intentional about, and you need to figure out a way how to do that. And the best example I can think of is if you're in an organization and there is a vacancy on some other team because someone just quit, put your hand up and be like, I will oversee this team for the next 3 months. That's probably the easiest way to actually do that. So if you're the chief development officer and the director of finance leaves, volunteer to manage the finance team. It may not be your thing, and maybe an over and above, but it will give you a bit of glimpse in the skill set and comfort, which will actually be like a better payout long-term.
That's a fascinating idea. I love that. And this conversation has been chock full of those types of things. And like I said, very reassuring to hear what boards are looking for. I know that you all put out a great newsletter that folks can check out if they want more of this content. Can you let us know where they can find that and what sort of content they could expect in that?
Yeah, so we do have a Talent Insights newsletter on LinkedIn. That's probably a good read that goes out every Tuesday. I tend to be really chatty on LinkedIn, so following me on LinkedIn is probably always a good spot, because I guarantee at least once a week I will have some sort of a light bulb moment for you with insider stories around what happens in the nonprofit sector that are very real life examples from some point in the nonprofit journeys that we're all on. And that's probably the best thing to do, is really stay on top of what currently is happening in a lot of organizations. So the fact that 2 out of 3 executive directors plan on leaving is something we should all be aware of. Doesn't mean that we need to lose sleep over it, but we need to plan for it. And so interestingly enough, if you are in an organization where you have a leader, chances are they're probably thinking about leaving that role in the next 3 to 5 years. And if you want to be an executive director in 3 to 5 years, you got to go have a conversation with your boss today. Because this gives you the opportunity to put your hand up and say, this is something I might be interested in the future. Let's see how I can diversify that skill set that I have with the endorsement of my current boss, so that they will actually have someone to rely on that knows more than just you or whatever vertical you're responsible for. And you get to do that internally, which is where you have the most negotiating power to do these kinds of things. It is very, very difficult to say something along the lines of, I'm the director of finance, but I want to be an executive director one day, so I'm going to apply for a chief development officer role because it's all about money. So I'm sure I can figure it out.
Right.
No one's going to hire you. But again, internally, you can make some of those negotiations work a little bit better.
Well, I love these real life, sort of like the snapshot of what's going on and the nuggets. And so would absolutely encourage folks to check out your all's LinkedIn newsletter with Charity Search Group, and just very, very much appreciate you joining us. So thank you so much for coming and sharing some of those nuggets on our LinkedIn Live.
Oh my God, anytime. And it's an amazing place. I've spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector. And I think that we all, it's one of those industries where we all pitch in to sort of spread the knowledge. There's a lot of resources out there. And I'm a fundraiser by heart, so I love talking to people. So anytime someone has a question, want to know more, happy to chat.
Well, that's appreciated. And I am actually headed off to BridgeCon right now, and my flight is in just over an hour. So I'm going to be splitting as well. But thank you so much for joining us. And for anybody who tuned in, we would love for you to join us next week as well. We've got we've scheduled 3 or 4 of these out now that all of them are ones that we're really excited about, sharing how modern EDs should think about it. And we've got a little video about what the next one will be. So thank you all so much.
Coming up on episode 104 of the Proimpact Pod, how should modern executive directors think about community building? Join host Greg Harrell-Edge and special guest Tasha Van Black live on LinkedIn on Tuesday, August 5th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, or catch the replay on YouTube.